don't fall. That's when you know you're gonna go dry. And the rain don't fall. That's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Welcome to Thinking Green. This show is being taped, so unfortunately we won't be able to accept call-ins. I have to say it was scheduled very spontaneously less than 24 hours ago, or about 24 hours ago, but it seemed like a really important topic that we wanted to put out there. So I want to introduce my guests. Tim Appleton, who is the Advocacy and Outreach Program Director from Compassion and Choices Action Network, and Luther Weeks, who has been on the show in other capacities several times, who's a volunteer with the organization. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I guess I'll just ask to start out about, like, what is the mission of the organization?
Compassion and Choices is the Compassion and Choices Action Network is the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit that works every day to improve care and expand options at end of life. So each one of us can chart our own end of life care journey aligned with our values and beliefs. We do this work all across the nation and right here in Connecticut.
And you are based in Connecticut.
Yeah, I live in South Windsor, Connecticut.
And how long have you been involved in this organization, and what was the draw for you?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I first started working for the organization about 10 years ago, and at the time I was working up at the state capitol when someone approached me about a unique job opportunity for a really interesting issue. And I was, well, I wonder what that could be, and I started going through the interview process. And something interesting happened. As sometimes happens when you go for a new job opportunity, a good friend of mine was dying of cancer in Bridgeport Hospital. And he was a U.S. Army veteran, Special Forces officer, was deployed multiple times, and he ended up with cancer as a result of all of that. And as I was working at the state capitol at the time, I had an opportunity for him and his family to fly a United States flag over our state capitol and present that flag to him before he died. This was at the same time I was going through the interview process for this job now. And I realized as we presented this flag to Al at the hospital that we could do better for Al. We could give more as a state than a flag, which would have been so deeply meaningful for him anyway. What Al also may have wanted, may have appreciated, was more options at end of life. And I kind of put all that together in my mind and thought about my own personal experience with my dad, who had a difficult end of life journey that might have been better. And figured that this is more than just an opportunity for a job. This could be something that I could really sink my teeth into and correct the status quo that exists here in the state of Connecticut.
It is a subject that not a lot of people want to think about unless we're in a situation, or until we're in the situation that we really have to, because honestly, all of us will be in that situation at some point. So Luther, I know, because I've known you for a long time, that this is an issue that's kind of near and dear to you, but how did you get involved with this organization?
Well, so the organization came after, the issue came first. But as you know, I was up at the Capitol, grassroots lobbyist, and I went into a hearing for this, quite a few years ago, maybe 2008, something like that. And I just listened to a few people testifying. I said, gee, that sounds like an issue I'm interested in. And then 2012, I was suddenly called into my cousin and sat with him in his last day of life up in Vermont. And I have no idea what his wishes were because he was pretty unresponsive that day. But he would have been better off if he could have chosen this alternative. So I said, I've got something to say. So I started testifying when this came up. And my group, Secular Connecticut, and its predecessors took on this thing.
Boy.
And I'll just say, last year, 2002, a friend of mine testified from his deathbed in California, where he had moved. He had been here with his daughter, who was dying of cancer, and she had died in January without this option. And he had this option, and he took it. But the day after that, I got the diagnosis of prostate cancer, which I soon learned was metastasized. I had chemo last summer, and I'm probably going to die from that. And a ways off, so nothing to worry about here right away. But gee, I'd like to have that option.
We don't offer palliative care on the show. Sorry.
Yeah, great. So. But, you know, I'd like to have this option, and I'd like to have the people that need it right now to have that option. So that's why I'm here.
And, you know, we mentioned beforehand, Connecticut is in some ways kind of a progressive state, but it is sort of a land of heavy, you know, steady habits. We don't usually do things on the forefront, I don't think. So I know the states on the West Coast, you know, I have a lot of relatives in Oregon, Washington, and California are probably way ahead of us on this.
Well, there are 10 states now and Washington, D.C. that have access to this option. You're correct. There are states out west that have this legislation, going as far west as Hawaii that enacted this law. But here on the East Coast, Maine, Vermont, and New Jersey all have enacted similar legislation. And what that means is that someone who lives in Middletown, Connecticut, has fewer options at end of life than someone that lives in Middletown, New Jersey. And that inequity is, you know, really tragic. I'm right now on a statewide walking tour of 300 miles in 30 days, and I'm 5 days in. And in those 5 days, I've recognized something, you know, that I knew to be true, but I've really began to take in. And that's when you take time to travel from one place to another and don't always drive a road, you really see a lot of this state. And you realize something that we all know, this is a beautiful place. And people like Luther have been so kind in helping me out in this 300 miles in 30 days, and there's this whole community of people around me to help me do this thing. And I would say that right now, because of this end-of-life healthcare inequity, we are forcing people to travel to different states, away from their community, away from the beauty of this state, to get the end-of-life care they need. That's not right, and that's what aid in dying, passage of aid in dying in this state would do. Now, you're right, Connecticut is a land of steady habits, but the first time this law was enacted was back in 1997. And since then, 10 states and Washington, D.C., 11 total jurisdictions have passed this law. There's extensive experience. This is one of the most studied public policies that are out there today. And there's not been a single case of abuse, misuse, or coercion in the law. And when you put it all together, it's clear that every year that passes without this law being enacted is a cruel death sentence of immeasurable suffering from those who want the law and can't have it. We got to get it fixed.
Now this, you know, law, well, it has been proposed for many sessions in Connecticut, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How long has this fight been
Yeah.
already, you know, gotten as far as the early stages of
Right.
getting to the legislature?
So I started in 2012, so that puts me about a 10-year veteran in this fight. And a couple of years ago, it was 3 years ago, a unique thing happened for the very first time. We got it out of the Public Health Committee, finally. And in the days preceding, we were looking at the numbers, and it became clear that we were going to be successful. And then I started thinking exactly, well, how long ago have we looked? So I ended up calling the state library to, like, you know, do some actual research, right, and find out. And it dates, the first bills were introduced by the Public Health Committee and George Jepson when he was in the state Senate.
Oh my gosh.
In 1994.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, so it's when you look at the arc of this, the period of time it takes to pass these laws in states that have now passed it, it's between 20 and 25 years about every single time. Back in California, that law passed, air quotes, suddenly, but it was an overnight sensation, 25 years in the making. You might remember a story of a young woman, Brittany Menard, who was on the cover of People magazine years ago. And she's a beautiful young woman who had just been married, and she looked like a model. And Dan Diaz, I think you've met Dan. He's looks like a model too, both from Northern California, and had everything going for them. And like too many people, she ended up with a glioblastoma, and she had a terribly aggressive form of brain cancer. And she was forced, as I mentioned before, to move to Oregon from California, leaving beautiful California for her, all of her community around her, all her healthcare team, and reestablishing residency in Oregon to access aid and dying, because for many people, not all, glioblastoma, especially hers, and she had the very best medical team that went to the very best medical schools. For her, she wanted more options at end of life, and she was forced to leave Oregon. That story ended up being on the cover of People magazine and helped lift that California campaign into what then people thought was an overnight success. But there were people working on that issue in California for 20 years prior.
Now, do you have any particular legislative champions in Connecticut who are really, being supportive of the effort?
We're very blessed to have a number of different lawmakers who are very supportive. And it's my privilege, and I know you feel the same way too, Luther. It's our privilege to work with them. People like State Senator Saud Anwar, the co-chair of Public Health.
He's also been great with the people working for like Medicare for All, single-payer state health system.
Unique lawmaker that can couple policy making as a state lawmaker as well as his practice of medicine. It really makes him a unique and special lawmaker for sure. His colleague, Representative Christine McCarthy-Vahey, is very supportive. And over the last 2 years, our co-sponsor list has grown to 37 different members. So our number of co-sponsors increases, and the dedication to this legislation only increases as well.
Well, now the other side of the coin, who are you getting pushback from?
Well, there are groups that kind of coalesce around the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church who are opposed. There's some disability rights opponents that are vocal in opposition to this legislation.
Who are fearful of abuse, perhaps?
Yeah, and what's interesting about what I find I have to be very mindful about is that for generations, people in the disability community have been set aside, abused, misused, not heard for generations. And we should all be very careful about ableism because it exists. And prior to me taking this job, I must admit, I didn't know enough about that history to fully understand. And our opponents would likely say, Tim, you still don't know enough of the history because you support aid and dying. But I would say that the legislation is very, very carefully drawn to assure that people in vulnerable populations are not abused, misused, or coerced. And it's not just me that says so. There's over 25 years of evidence dating all the way back to '97 from Oregon all the way to now, where not a single case of abuse, misuse, or coercion has occurred. Now, our opponents might throw out, some what they call examples, but when you dig right down to it, into these particular cases, there's no there. One particular case that they cited this year was a person who opponents said was denied health care insurance because the California law passed that I mentioned before. Now, what's interesting is she was someone who had cancer. She requested experimental cancer treatment, and she said that she was denied because aid in dying existed. That was their statement. That's what they told lawmakers to. And what she doesn't say is 4 years in a row, prior to the passage of the legislation in California, she was also denied. So
that was not really the reason she was denied.
No.
No, it was expensive treatment. It was probably why she was denied.
Well, whatever the reason, what is true is that she was denied previously, and they spent a lot of money on advertising that was on television to suggest otherwise, and that's not true.
Yeah. Did I mention something?
Sure.
I mean, in the surveys, 75% of the voters in Connecticut are in favor of this. And, you know, even 69% of Catholics, and, you know, Protestants are 70%, I believe it is, are in favor of this. Democrats, Republicans, independents, minorities, non-minorities, every group you look at, men, women, they're all significantly in favor of it. Even people with disabilities, 65% in favor of this law. So, you know, the people in the state of Connecticut want this law.
And I guess when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because it's not pushing people to do it, it's providing more choices.
Yeah.
It isn't taking away the choices they already have. It's adding to the list.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing the vast majority does understand that.
And some of the opponents say, well, the reason is that hospice isn't good enough. Connecticut's one of the best states for hospice, but I believe we and other people, advocates, are all in favor of improving hospice any way people can improve it. But that's no reason to eliminate this option.
There's the former Oregon hospice director. Her name is Ann Jackson. Wonderful person. Back in, dating from like 1994 to 1998, was opposed to aid in dying and voted twice against it in referendums at the time. Twice.
Oh, interesting.
And so now the law finally passes over her objection, and she's still Oregon hospice director. She starts seeing more people coming to hospice. She starts seeing that the length of hospice stays began to right balance. People weren't staying too long. People weren't coming in too late. And she began to realize that this was attributed to more and more conversations happening about end-of-life care as a result of passage of this law. And she's testified now twice in Connecticut in support of this legislation. And that, you know, we can talk about facts and figures, right? And, you know, sometimes they don't land as much as the stories like Brittany Menard in California. But, you know, Herb mentioned one of our Brittany Menards, Kim Hoffman. You know, having done this work for 10 years, I know that this is an issue of real people who live in this state with real stories and, you know, are desperate for these options, or we have surviving family members who will now live, will have generational trauma, experiencing the terrible death of a loved one that could have been avoided. Mike Mazzone was an MMA fighter, a union steward, someone in Orange, Connecticut, who was also a semi-pro football player.
Oh my gosh.
I had the pleasure to meet him, many years ago and get to know him. And his wife, Jennifer, told him, "You got to calm down. You're doing too much." So he started becoming a marathon runner.
Oh.
And a couple years into doing that, he noticed some changes in his athleticism and his functionality. And over time, as often happens with this illness, it takes a while to get that diagnosis of ALS. And by then, you're really beginning to have serious impacts. He testified twice to support aid in dying. He went all the way up to the state capitol on 2 occasions. The second time, it was really, really difficult for him because his illness had advanced. And I used to joke with him, "You're a man mountain." He was a big dude, you know? And that illness took so much away from him. And the last time he testified, he told the members of the committee, the Public Health Committee, who had yet to ever pass the bill, you know, "I will die an excruciatingly painful death. I will drown in my own fluids as they build up in my lungs, and it will be a nightmare." And within 6 to 8 months, that happened. And I went to his wake. There were maybe 1,500 people there around the block because he was so involved with his community. Again, you know, community. We're a beautiful community here in Connecticut, a beautiful state. And the only option he had was to leave all of it to get care that he should have had here. And at that wake, I looked around, and not one of those members of the Public Health Committee who, you know, didn't even vote on it that year were at that wake. I was, and it's, you know, real stories like that once lawmakers hear and listen and sit in presence of them, they begin to realize that, you know, this is what that's all about. And in subsequent years later, with Luther's help, we've been able to get it out of the Public Health Committee. Now we're facing a similar barrier in the Judiciary Committee.
Which unfortunately has not held hearings in a while. So they don't get to hear these stories like the Public Health has, and that has changed people in the public health over the years. But I just want to mention another aspect of it, is peace of mind. A good number, about 50%, Tim can give you better numbers, of the people that get the prescription never take it. And that's because they have, for whatever reason, a peaceful death, okay? And, you know, so, you know, I know darn well, I'm not going to want to leave as long as I'm around family, and I'm, you know, some people, all they want to do is watch sports. If they're able to watch sports and they don't have a lot of pain, you know, other people want something else at the end. I'd want to watch the news and Thinking Green, maybe. I'm
not sure. I don't know. That would be its own kind of pain and dying.
Maybe,
I think watching
maybe,
the news.
but I get enjoyment out of that kind of thing. But anyway, half the people don't use it. But it's peace of mind for the rest of those people in their last 3 or 6 months that they have that option. They don't have to go through something excruciating. They don't have to have their family put up with that. And it would actually give me peace of mind right now. It might be 10, 15 years before I need an option like this or would like to have that option. But it gives me more peace of mind now because I don't have to plan. Then I wouldn't have to plan. Do I have to move to pick things up and move to some other state, leave my medical care here? Or, you know, what other option is there? So it would give me more peace of mind. I happen to have pretty good peace of mind anyway, but it would give me that much more peace of mind all that way if I knew this option was available to me.
Another dear friend of mine said the same thing, Luther. His name was Ron Silverio. He also had cancer. And I got to know him about 6 months before he died. And he said to me, I could go on living if I didn't need to worry about how I was going to die. That's just what you said.
Yeah.
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 The other thing, as you were talking about it, and the option of people in Connecticut having to go to New Jersey, for example, is, so what's happening on the federal front? Is there any chance that there's going to be movement in our federal government on this?
Well, I think the Dobbs decision has, you know, said that this is an issue for the states, and that's why we're very active. This past year, I think we were active in about 20 different states across the country, enacting bills, you know, doing our best to, you know, pass legislation in about 20 different states. And at the federal level, we're doing some work assuring that the aid in dying law in Washington, D.C. is safe and fully protected. Of course, it's a unique situation there in D.C. as well as working to change the federal ban on federal dollars being used to access aid in dying medication. So if you're in a federal health care plan at the end of your life, like Medicare or Medicaid, you can't use that to access aid in dying medication. You have to use private insurance. We're trying to get that changed as well.
So other than actually having a specific aid in dying federal law, it's more about removing roadblocks actually at that level.
Yeah, what's interesting is when these laws pass, we work really hard to strike the right balance between safeguards that are completely necessary and access, which is completely necessary. You can, I'm sure there are laws passed here in Connecticut and elsewhere that, you know, by the time it goes through the legislative process, no one can use them. We don't want that. While at the same time, we don't want a law that doesn't work as intended for whom it's intended. And we've been able to, working with stakeholders across state capitals, you know, across the country in state capitals to strike that right balance. And the laws proposed last year in the state of Connecticut would have struck that balance between safeguards and access, and worked for whom it's intended. And what Luther said is right. Majorities of people who finally gain access to the medication take it, just over 60%, but there's about 38% that go through the entire process and decide not to take it and die a natural death. And what's interesting is since 1997, all the way to 2023, across 10 states and Washington, D.C., just over I think it's 6,300 people have ever used this law. So a very small portion of all those people have died in all those states since 1997 have ever gone through it. And when you think about it, it makes sense because, you know, few people fit into the safeguards. Few people who fit into the safeguards and are interested in the law begin the process of going through it. Fewer still actually qualify. Fewer still qualify and are, you know, and on it goes. And it's, in the end, you know, not very many people will gain access to this and utilize the law, but for them, as it did for Ron, he would have been able to go on living if he didn't have to worry about how he was going to die.
And I'd say that Compassionate Choices does more than this too.
Yeah,
I'm impressed with the organization. They will help people plan the end of life, plan their wills, plan their directives and stuff. My wife and I did that 10 years ago. And it was it's very refreshing to know it's all taken care of. My children know exactly what my funeral is going to be like. Okay, they know where I'm going to be buried. They know what I want. It's more than end-of-life directive. It's explaining to them what I really want and designating someone as in charge when you can't speak for yourself. And if my wife were unable to, or I wasn't able to for her, then, you know, one of our children knows exactly what we want. And they're just very aware of this. It's not, and I recommend that to anybody. It's very refreshing. And the longer you do it before it becomes a real issue, the better it is. You don't want to die and have people scrambling around and not knowing all these answers of what would he want, what would she want. You know, where am I going to put him in the grave? Or do they just want to be, you know, put out to sea or whatever it is they want. And then also, we give counseling near end of life. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a lot of healthcare professionals recently at a table we had. And they don't know this is available. And there's hospices that would do what you want. And there's hospices that maybe are hospices in name only, and they're not what you would expect. And this organization will help you get in touch with the kind of hospice that your loved one would want, and other options, and help with making decisions near the end of life. So it's not just this. You know, we're not just about this one thing.
Yeah, that's what. I'm glad you brought that up, Luther, because our organization, as I said from the beginning, wants you to be able to chart your own end-of-life care journey aligned with your values and beliefs. What does that mean, really? Aligned with my values and beliefs? Well, I don't know, because it's different for every person,
Right.
right? So we have a bunch of tools and resources and, you know, licensed clinical social workers that'll get on the phone with you and help you to find that. There's all these planning guides and resources to do that, and you know, go through and think about it, and you know, it's kind of like doing some homework, because you got to talk with your, you know, you got to talk with your family, you got to talk with your physician, you got to talk to a faith leader if you have one, or if you don't, that's okay too. Everyone is different, and that's why if you wanted access to Aid in Dying, we're going to fight for you. But also, if you don't, if you want to go through that 3rd, 4th, and 5th round of chemotherapy and have a battle all the way to the end, we're going to support both of those things. And what our organization does, a big part of what our organization does, of course, is this work around legislation and Aid in Dying. But a bigger, more important part is making sure people, like all of your listeners, all of your viewers, can you know, figure out what that end-of-life care journey is. Get that advanced care directive. Get that living will. Make sure that if you have a do not resuscitate order, it's like you know, on a magnet on your refrigerator. So if you know, first responders come, they know exactly, you know, that this is a particular situation that requires a different set of tools. So far too few people go through that planning, or if they do, they don't look at it annually. I talked to a woman at an event just recently who spoke of her mother, and who 5 years ago had a terrible healthcare situation that prompted the need for an advance directive and living will, and to go through that process. And I asked, you know, how is your mother? How is your mother? And she said, oh, she's still with us and she's fine. I said, now would be, you know, have you redone your advance directive or living will? Things have changed in those 5 years. And say, no, you know, I haven't. You know, people need to look at that stuff annually as well to make sure that, you know, what they wrote, you know, years ago is still. I mean, do you have an advance directive and living will? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I don't.
Right. Well.
So I'm listening.
Yeah, we have a bunch of resources to help you and your viewers get one of those filled out at compassionatechoices.org.
And I was actually getting ready to make a pitch for your website, because I went on it
Thank you.
today, because, you know, I didn't really know what I was getting into. And there were a huge amount of resources, and I noted that not just for patients and their families, but for medical professionals, for you know, every people who are involved in every aspect of it. One thing about it, I noted that since COVID, of course, telehealth has been a big issue, and I'm guessing if you are, you know, providing help to people who are, you know, disabled and ill, that telehealth is a help for your work as well.
Mm-hmm. So
are there caveats with it, or is it?
So the assistance that our organization provides is usually over the telephone. However, in different states where this bill is authorized, Aid in Dying is authorized, there are telehealth opportunities there as well. So it's a, you know, that's the one thing that we know to be true is things change and evolve over time, and what, you know, works in Hawaii might not work in, you know, Illinois or Connecticut. So every state is different, and we're trying our best to accommodate every state.
Yeah, I mean, everything is different state by state, whatever, you know, whatever you're dealing with. I mean, Luther, I'm sure, could tell you how things are different in the voting world, state by state, but, you know, medical choices and options and the landscape is all different also. Okay, what I, you know, thought might be a very early question on, I'm just now getting to, so why the walk?
Oh.
What made you decide on this particular action that you're in the middle of right now?
Well, thank you for asking, because sometimes I was asking that myself as we did
I bet you were
13 and a half miles in the rain today. Why this walk? So I went to my physician in January of this year, and he said, look, you really have to start dieting and exercising. And I took this person at their word, and I started dieting and exercising. And I noticed on my phone, it tracks the steps I took. And at one point, I was really excited because I had done the daily allotment of steps I needed to do, and I was stretching out, like, oh, I've really accomplished something. So I did more and more and more and more and more. And at the end of this year's legislative session in Connecticut, when the bill was defeated again, I was really struggling. And you were at that, we had a big meeting down in New Haven.
Right.
We broke bread down in New Haven. And I was really struggling to figure out what thing we could do to change it, you know? What can we do? What can we do? While at the same time, I was doing all this walking and dieting and exercising. And I looked at my phone to figure out one Saturday afternoon, just, geez, I wonder how many steps I've taken. Oh my gosh, my app will tell me on a look back of over the year. And what I noticed was, at the time, I'd walked 400 miles since January. I'm like, huh, I used to live in Buffalo, New York, and I could walk to Buffalo. That's a 400. And then I remembered Senator Murphy does a statewide walk. And I thought to myself, why does a U.S. Senator have the monopoly on, you know, through walks through Connecticut? And maybe this is something that we could do here in Connecticut. And I began to really kind of look into the sort of walks he was doing and realized that, you know, he was walking either east-west or north-south over a period of a week or two to accommodate his extensive schedule and, you know, legislating in Washington, D.C. as a U.S. Senator. And I realized then, and, you know, I spoke to a number of different people. I think I called you too, Luther, and I said, Luther, I have this crazy idea, and please talk me out of it. And Luther was unable, and we determined that we would set a course around the state of Connecticut, trying to hit all four corners in 300 miles over 30 to 35 days. I hope it's no more than 30. So that's what we started this past Monday. Luther was kind enough to join me in my hometown of South Windsor, Connecticut, and we took our first steps together on Monday. And here we are now down in New London on the 5th day, and we're doing it on Saturdays too. Sunday we have off, and you know, hopefully we'll be done by the end of October back in South Windsor. So we start in South Windsor, all around the state, and go back.
So what's your route been? I'm guessing you're about a quarter of the way through, or you will be by the end of this week.
Yeah, like, yeah.
Are you doing a circle, or are you going to hit the major towns? Or
so we're trying to get all four corners of the state. So it's like, you can imagine a bow tie and you put it over the state of Connecticut. That's probably about it. Yeah. So that's the route. And some days, you know, just like life, some days are full of rain, and some days are sunshiny, and some days are in between.
Hopefully you won't get the 100-degree days. But
right, and you know, I think we said that, I said this as we were talking coming in, however uncomfortable this might be for me, however tired and exhausted it might be for me, I'm very mindful of those like my friend Ron, who died without this option, desperate for it, and the agony that he faced. People like Mike, who wanted this option, testified about it, did everything he could to pass the law, and he lived and died his predicted nightmare in the legislature. I am carrying his mass card. You know, some viewers, you know, this might be deeply meaningful. As I said, I was at that wake, and I'm carrying his mass card this entire trip. And this is Mike. He was my friend, and he has a lovely wife, Jennifer, whom you've met, and young kids. And after he died, Jennifer was faced with picking up the pieces of being a young mother and a widow. And it took her 2 years to start having the courage to talk about Mike and advocate up at the state capitol. And now she is carrying on his advocacy on behalf of Aid and Dying. And watching her go through the grieving process and grow into this role now as a vocal advocate for aid in dying is very, very powerful. Just like it is when, you know, I see you testifying, Luther, or anyone else. I mean, there are people who are dedicated to the passage of this legislation, and I know this law will pass. It's clear. As Luther said, 75% of Connecticut residents support it. We have growing support in the state legislature every single year. The only question is, how long is it going to take? And how many people like Mike, like Kim, like Ron, will die with unnecessary suffering and end of life before it does? Those are the only two questions that are left.
And they're not the only ones that suffer.
Yeah.
Their family suffers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what have your? I know you've just started this walk this past week, but what has the response been? Are you getting any attention from like the mainstream media, or, are we going to start seeing you on talk shows all over around the state?
Well, I'll always remember our time together as my favorite. We are
first whatever.
We are getting a really good response from the media so far. I think WTNH is going to be joining us tomorrow for a portion of the walk or do some sort of interview. The NBC affiliate and the Fox affiliate have covered it. There's been some really good articles in online, newspaper, or I don't know, online journals, online media here in Connecticut so far. And what's I find heartening isn't just the media response, but we talked about this before, Luther. Over these last several years, our asks of volunteers like you have been pretty specific. Call your lawmakers, testify, and with this thing that we're doing now, there are other opportunities that we've never asked of people that they're willing to do, and also it creates a space where Luther might pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, we're coming through, and we have this beautiful opportunity to have this conversation together. So this new opportunity is creating other things, not just for the media, which is important, but also for our supporters who have been with us every step of the way.
So where are you headed after Southeast Connecticut?
Wow. So I go back up north and west to get to the another corner of the state. We have great support out in all parts of the state, and we're going to hit as many as we can in 300 miles. What's funny is that we have, as I was talking about our supporters, right? So we can't go everywhere, but we're going to as many places as we can. And from here, going up north and west, and end up in Litchfield County, and then from Litchfield County, we'll go go south, and we're going to do as much as we can.
Are you hitting any really beautiful spots geographically, or are you finding yourself,
I'm only 5 days in. I was born in West Virginia, and my family moved to Buffalo, New York, and then for work I moved out here 22 years ago. So I've lived in a number of different places and have had beautiful places. Connecticut is my home, and Connecticut is very, very beautiful. And even in these last 5 days, as I said, when you're walking it, you're slowing down and you're going at your own pace, and you see this really beautiful vistas and just great things to see and experience, and that's what's been so gratifying. It's a little easier on the days it doesn't rain, but it's still really nice when it does.
So do people see you walking and interact with you at all?
Yeah, occasionally. Yeah, they do. We're only 5 days in, and 2 of those 5 have been rainy.
Yeah.
I had
so you're the only one outside.
Well, yeah. The first day, we had a guy named Bruce, who's 70 years old. His wife died a terrible death of cancer, who likely would have benefited from this option. And without any sort of, I've been kind of like training for this for the last like 2 months. Bruce is like, yeah, I'll go with you. And he walked 10 miles the very first day in the rain. And Bruce was great. And the last mile or so, he said, how much further? And I said, I think it's about a mile, Bruce. And he came out with his big cigar and he lit it. And he said, the last mile, he smoked his victory cigar in the rain.
Wow.
So just today, we had a group of people for lunch and learn, or coffee and conversation. I don't know exactly what it was, but we had a meal, and about 5 or 6 people got together, and we talked about this issue and what it's going to take to pass and how they can help. And if your viewers out there are interested in finding out more about our walk or about the work what we do in Connecticut, they can go to compassionandchoices.org/Connecticut, and they can see information about the walk and what they can do to participate.
And what do you foresee for this coming legislative session? It's a short session.
Yeah.
Is it going to come back?
Well, we owe it to people who are facing terminal illness without this option now to keep, getting this bill proposed, and we're going to pass this legislation. As you said, you're right, it's a short session, and as Luther said also correctly, that the Judiciary Committee needs to hear the stories of people who need this option now, and the stories of those surviving family members of people who did not have the option and died terrible deaths. And once they start listening to those stories and we educate them, we're very confident that similar to the Public Health Committee, where it took some time, we got the votes there, and we'll do the same thing in the Judiciary Committee. Yeah. But we need to get that hearing.
Now we have about 5 minutes left, and what I usually try to do is give people an idea beyond just going to your website of how they can support the effort.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that it used to be, well, just call your legislator, but
yeah.
Now there are doubtless a longer list of things that they could do.
Yeah, if they're interested in helping out the walk, we're doing phone banking to lists to get people aware of the walk and try to direct them to these kind of coffee and conversation events we're having every single day. If you want to be part of that. Luther has stepped up. I don't think he can do it all 35 days, though, as one of our logistics specialists that helps me get from my pickup, the end point of the walk, back to where I left my car 10 miles back. So there are opportunities to do that. There are also opportunities, if you're interested, to walk portions of the walk or all of the walk if you're able. Not everyone has the privilege to do this thing. And I'm mindful of that. But for those that want to be helpful, they can do those things. We have a great Facebook presence at Compassion and Choices Connecticut on Facebook. And at the end of every day, there's a list of lawmakers in the areas that we walk through. Call them. Call them and ask those questions. How long is it going to take, and how many people are going to suffer unnecessarily before you pass this law?
Yeah. And I'd say there's ways of educating yourself. You can read what Compassion and Choices has on this. I don't know if you have to donate, but if you sign up there, I get several brochures every year that have stories and things. And then, look at the testimony from last year. Mm-hmm. Look at the testimony. Don't read it. Just listen to the videos. I think they're still available.
Yep.
Probably
are. And hear all these stories. And then reflect, what do you want? How do you want for yourself and for your relatives? How do you want them to die? And, and plan your thing. But then from that, I think you'll see that you really want this. And you could just contact your legislator and say, this is a good idea. I want you to vote for it. But if you really feel it in your heart and understand it, that's another step, another level.
And I did notice one other detail looking at the website today is that there's an event planned for October 26th.
Yeah, it's our big signature event.
So you can spend the last 3 minutes talking about that.
This was an idea first hatched during the pandemic. We wanted a big fundraising virtual event, and it was so successful. We've done it year over year over year. And you can go out to our website at compassionandchoices.org and find out how you can be an ambassador to the event and host a, a viewing and a virtual viewing with amongst your friends and family. You can pitch in and donate. It's a great opportunity to help us. There was a lawmaker I used to work with in the state Senate who, state senators have to run every 2 years.
Yep.
And there's public financing here in Connecticut. So he would say to a group of people, this bus doesn't run on love. We need financial support. Compassionate Choices is no different. And over 98% of our contributions that come to us are from individual donors. And we need that support to keep doing not just the work in the state legislatures that people may or may not agree with, but the things that we can all support. Do you have an advance directive? Do you have a living will? That's what that financial support helps pay for.
Well, thanks for both of you for stopping by for this kind of impromptu show that I didn't know I was doing when I woke up yesterday. And it was really, educational, and I hope we make some more progress in Connecticut, because I'd hate to see a situation where, I don't know, New Jersey becomes kind of, I don't know, we're not a tourist state for it, but, just a hub, or just a couple of states on the East Coast. It seems like people should have choices closer to home.
I think it's important, no matter where you live, you should all be able to have the same end-of-life care journey aligned with your values and beliefs. And right now, that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both, and we'll get this up there. It will be a nice change from election-related stuff that we've mostly been having this time of year. And thanks for walking and for sharing your story.
Thank you very much for having me. And having us.
And thanks,
Thank
Luther,
you.
for hooking us up together for this.
Okay, my pleasure.
When the rain don't